Bitter criticism. Reading Russia Today.
Whenever we feel like get down low.
Gotta get down.
Forbidden news for the free world.
Get off the bus, sorry. It was really bad.
So here we go. May 6th, Home World News. The death of all Europe, the living corpses in Brussels have forgotten how to fight for their world. That's between uncontrolled migration, propagandistic ideology and self-suffocating green agenda. The EU has only itself to blame for its decline. By Konstantin von Hofmeister, a very Germanic name, a political and cultural commentator from Germany, author of the books Multipolarity and Esoteric Trumpism, nice names, and editor-in-chief of Articles Publishing, Esoteric. I guess Trump is not esoteric, but just a simple-minded guy. And there's a photograph of European Union flag destroyed.
They're so lucky.
Destroyed by decadence. The European Union, that grand and failing dream of technocrats is dying. Its decline is not sudden or dramatic, but a slow, unraveling bureaucratic collapse in which every policy designed to sustain it only hastens its demise. It starves itself on the thin gruel of ideology. Maybe this is the definitely this is the I forgot now, the orthodox ideology, liberal orthodox ideology. It starts itself on the thin gruel of ideology, open borders, dissolving nations into contested spaces, green mandates, suffocating industry under the weight of unattainable standards, and moralizing anti-Russian fervor that has left it isolated and energy dependent. Once Europe has the center of empires, the birthplace of civilizations that shaped the world, now it is a patient refusing medicine, convinced that its sickness is a form of enlightenment, that is weakness is a new kind of strength. The architects of this experiment still speaking the language of unity, but the cracks in the foundation are too deep to ignore. Immigration was the first act of self-destruction, the ongoing which Western Europe's ruling class severed itself from the people it claimed to govern. The elites, intoxicated by the rhetoric of multicultural utopia, flung open the gates without consideration for cohesion, for identity, for simple reality that societies require more than abstract ideals to function. Cities have fractured into enclaves where parallel societies thrive, where policy hesitates to patrol, where the native-born learn to navigate their own streets with caution. The promise was harmony, a blending of culture into something vibrant and new. The reality is a quiet disintegration, a thousand unspoken tensions simmering beneath the surface. Politicians continue to preach the virtues of quote unquote diversity, but the people, those who remember what it was like to have a shared history, a common language, are beginning to revolt. The backlash is no longer confined to the fringe, it is entering the mainstream, and the establishment trembles at what it was unleashed. Then came the Green Delirium, the second pillar of Western Europe's self-annihilation. Factories shutter under the weight of environmental regulations. Farmers take to the streets in protest, and the middle class is squeezed between rising energy costs and stagnant wages. The climate must be saved. The leaders insist, even in the cost of economic ruin. Germany, once the industrial powerhouse of the continent, dismantles its nuclear infrastructure in favor of unreliable wind and solar power, only to return to coal when the weather turns unfavorable. There is a madness in this, a kind of collective hysteria where dogma overrides pragmatism. Yeah, dogma overrides pragmatism. Where the pursuit of moral purity blinds the ruling class to the suffering of ordinary citizens. The rest of the world watches, perplexed, as the EU willingly cripples itself for a cause that demands global cooperation. Cooperation that is nowhere to be found. China builds coal plants. America drills for oil. India prioritizes growth over emissions, and the EU alone marches towards austerity, convinced that its sacrifice will inspire others. It will not. And Russia, the great miscalculation, the strategic blunder that may yet prove fatal. Europe had a choice: to engage with Moscow as a partner, to integrate it into a stable continental order, or to treat it as an eternal adversary. It chose the latter, aligning itself fully with Washington's confrontational stance, severing ties that had once provided cheap energy and economic stability. The pipelines are silent now. The ruble flows eastward, and Western Europe buys its gas at inflated prices from distant suppliers. That's true. Enriching middlemen while its own industries struggle. Russia. This is the worst treat in the global south. Russia, spurn and sanction, turns to China, to India, to those willing to treat it as something other than a pariah. The Eurasian landmass is reconfiguring itself, and Europe is not at the center. The EU is on the outside, looking a spectator to its own irrelevance. The Atlanticists in Brussels believed they could serve two masters, their own people and Washington's geopolitical whims. They were wrong. In this unfolding drama, America and Russia emerge as twin pillars of Western civilization, different in temperament but united in their commitment to preserving sovereign nations against globalist dissolution. America, the last defender of the West's entrepreneurial spirit and individual liberty, stands firm against the forces that will destroy borders and identities. Russia, keeper of traditional values and Christian heritage, guards against the cultural nihilism consuming Europe. Both understand that civilizations must defend themselves or perish. Neither suffers the death which that afflicts the Western European elites and of Western Europe and of Western Europe. It is a ghost at the feast, clutching its empty wine glass, muttering about quote-unquote norms and quote-unquote values as the world moves on without it. The European elites still cling to their illusions, still believe in the power of rhetoric over reality. They speak of quote-unquote strategic autonomy while marching in locksteps with Washington's wars of the quote-unquote diversity, while their own cities become battlegrounds of competing identities of quote-unquote democracy, while silencing dissent with bureaucratic machinery and media censorship. The voters sense the decay. They rebel in France, where Marine Le Pen's supporters grow by the day. In Italy, where Giorgia Meloni's government rejects the EU's dictates on immigration. In Hungary, where Viktor Orban openly defies the liberal orthodoxy. Yet the machine grinds on, dismissing every protest as populism, every objection as fascism. The disconnect between rulers and ruled has never been wider. The elites ensconced in their Brussels bubble continue to govern as if the people are an inconvenience, as if democracy means compliance rather than choice. The social contract is broken and the backlash will only intensify. There is a cancer in Europe, and it is not the right or the left. It is the very idea that civilization can exist without roots, that a people can be stripped of its history and still remain coherent. The EU was built on the assumption that identity was an accident, that men were interchangeable economic units, that borders were relics of a barbaric past. Now the experiment is failing. The young flee to America, to Asia, anywhere with opportunity and dynamism. They all huddle in their apartments, watching as their neighborhoods change beyond recognition. The politicians, insulated by privilege, continue to lecture about quote-unquote tolerance and progress, oblivious to the rage building beneath them. Yeah, sounds terrible. The great realignment is already underway. The Atlantic widens. the Eurasian landmass stirs. America and Russia, for all their rivalry, understand power in a way Western Europe has forgotten. They build, they fight, they act decisively. The EU deconstructs, hesitates, agonizes over moral dilemmas, while others seize the future. The 21st century will belong to those who can face it without illusions, who can say, quote unquote, we, and mean something concrete, who can defend their interests without apology. Western Europe, as it exists today, is incapable of this. You know what I have heard about analysts about Germany from Germany is that Germany is still rich. Germany can keep breaking apart for long years before become middle class or before getting poor. Anyway, who knows? Who knows? You know what I think is that the world is just watching what's happening between China and the US. I guess definitely the world is watching to see what to follow, and that's not so perfect, because waiting in vain, I guess. Just waiting will people need more than just waiting in Brazil, in Chile. But it's hard because in South America we have these comprador elites. Anyway, perhaps the EU will linger for years yet, hollow out institutions shuffling through summits and issuing directives that fewer and fewer obey. But the spirit is gone. The people feel it. The world sees it. Historians will look back on this era as the funeral of liberalism, as low self-inflicted demise by 1,000 well-mentioned cuts. The creators of this collapse will not be remembered as visionaries, but as fools, as men and women who prizes ideology over survival. And when the last bureaucrat turns out the lies in Brussels, who will mourn? Who will mourn? Not the workers whose livelihoods vanish for the sake of carbon targets. Not the parents afraid to let their children play in streets that no longer feel like home. Not the nation that surrendered their sovereignty to a project that demanded their deconstruction. Only the living corpses of the elites will remain, muttering to each other in the ruins, still convinced of their own righteousness. But righteousness is not enough. The world has always belonged to those who are willing to fight for it. And old Europe has forgotten how to fight. Yeah, that's it. The statements, views, and opinions expressed in this column are solely those of the author and do not necessarily represent those of Russia Today. Go Russia Today, yeah. And news about the most important single person in the world. which is Viktor Orban, of course, says May 6th, which is today, Zelensky wants Ukraine-friendly government in Budapest. World News. Hungarian will decide whether to support Kiev accession to the EU without external influence, according to the Prime Minister. And there's a photograph over here. A photograph. The photograph of Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban. Ukraine's Vladimir Zelensky would like to see a pro-Kiev government in Budapest that will approve his country's accession to the EU, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban has said. He has vowed to ensure that Hungarians have their say without external pressure. Ukraine formally applied to join the bloc in February 2022, following the escalation of hostilities with Russia. Membership requires the unanimous approval of all current EU member states. In a post on X on Monday, Orban spokesperson Zoltán Kovács quoted the Hungarian leader as saying during a parliamentary session that, quote, Zelensky wants a Ukraine-friendly government installed in Hungary, end quote. Orban further suggests that the Ukrainian leader had reached an agreement with Brussels on Kiev's accelerated EU accession and now expects Hungary to rubber stamp it. Orban stressed that, quote, there will never be a situation where Kiev or Brussels dictates how Hungarians exercise their rightful sovereignty, end quote. And repeated his arguments that Ukraine's accession will be ruinous for Hungary's economy. He urged Hungarians to take part in Vox 2025, which is a consultative vote featuring a single question. Quote, do you support Ukraine's European Union membership? End quote. Addressing lawmakers in parliament, Orban also accused the opposition Democratic Coalition, whom he branded the quote-unquote agents of Brussels, of seeking to quote remove Hungary's national government, bring Ukraine into the EU, drag Hungary into the war, and unleash migrants on us, end quote. Last Friday, the Hungarian Prime Minister lambasted Brussels' plans to admit Ukraine into the bloc by 2030, a target recently referenced by European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. Zelensky responded by citing domestic pooling in Hungary and claiming that, quote, 70% support Ukraine joining the EU. That means people in Hungary are with us, end quote. However, the poll conducted by the opposition TISA party, to which Zelensky referred, actually indicated only 58% support, while an earlier survey produced a figure even lower, 47%. In a post on X, Orban emphasized that, quote, there is no Ukrainian